сюда. Ниже, вот самое разрушенное место, вот сюда вот. Во-во-во-во-во-во.
Pripyat was once a residential town housing personnel from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It is now deserted, save for a few research workers. It is located 2 miles from the 4th unit at Chernobyl, site of the explosion in April 1986. You will see a brief video chronicle of the sarcophagus construction. On Monday, April 28th, the alarm was raised at the Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden. For the first few days, the Soviet Union released no information about the accident. The explosion had expelled a huge cloud of radioactive dust. For 24 hours, it drifted across the territories of Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, and then dispersed over the northern hemisphere. Here we can see the breach between the 3rd and the 4th units. This is what the north side of the 4th unit looked like. The level of radiation at this point reached 2,000 Roentgen per hour. The roofing of the 4th unit turbine hall was destroyed by the fire and falling debris. At the time of the accident, fragments of reactor fuel core, highly radioactive fragments of nuclear fuel and graphite were expelled from the roof of the 3rd unit. April 30th, radiation was 340 Roentgen per hour at a height of 200 meters above the reactor. At this point, people had little idea of the gravity of the accident. Emergency workers had no experience of working in such conditions. The instruments they were using had to be designed especially for high radiation fields. Emissions of radioactive substances from the reactor continued. Radioactive dust continued to drift, polluting the air and the land. Helicopters attempted to decontaminate the area using a special agent. Every possible effort was made to prevent the fire from spreading from the 4th to the 3rd unit via the shared service lines. A considerable amount of nuclear fuel in the form of clinker, fine dust, and newly formed substances containing uranium had accumulated under the reactor at the time of the accident. By summer of 1986, the first radioactive dust cloud had destroyed 4 square kilometers of forest. The forest had absorbed several millions curie of radioactivity. Hundreds of miners began constructing a tunnel under the reactor. At the same time, a Moscow research institute was testing tablets of nuclear fuel. There was a fear of a meltdown at the reactor base following the failure of its cooling system. Fortunately, this new catastrophe failed to materialize. Special diagnostic devices containing instruments to measure temperature and radiation were used to investigate the scene of the explosion. The first 4 devices of this kind were lowered into place by helicopter on the 4th of August. Some recalled that the perilousness of the work provided its own inspiration. The government attempted to encourage this effect by means of patriotic slogans. This one says, "The power of friendship between the peoples of the USSR is stronger than the atom." It was clear that the ruins of the unit could not be left as they were. They continued to deteriorate and remained a strong source of radiation. The most dangerous area would be surrounded by a 200-kilometer-long road. 3 plants producing concrete were built not far from the power plant. The first one was commissioned on June 21st. Then began construction of the shelter, the so-called sarcophagus. Due to the high level of radiation, it was impossible to remove all the construction debris from the site. Devices under remote control were used for carrying out most of the work. The metal frames were constructed at a distance, brought to the unit by rail, and then sunk in concrete. About 700,000 tons of soil had to be removed from around the power plant. Then reinforced concrete plates were laid. The north part of the sarcophagus was built as an inclined wall. Radioactive fragments and soil were buried in the foundation of the first tier. This work was completed by the end of July. The 12 meters high second and third tiers shelves were mounted and grouted in concrete in August. Since there was still heavy radiation, specially protected machinery was used for the work. Concrete was brought in through hundreds of meters of specially constructed pipes. On September 14th, the fourth tier casing of the cascade wall was erected. By that time, about 100,000 cubic meters of concrete had been used for the construction of the wall. The time had come to begin mounting the ceiling. Victims of the catastrophe were not only human. Vehicles, which were irretrievably contaminated, were transported to a cemetery in the Chernobyl zone. All these vehicles are still there. Among them are buses and helicopters, military and civil trucks, ambulances and fire engines. The ceiling is now assembled and ready for fitting. Installation of the ceiling continued for more than 48 hours. Reinforced concrete ventilation shafts still standing after the accident were used as foundations for the ceiling. After the accident was a full seismological investigation of the region held. It is now known that the area is prone to earthquakes measuring up to 7 degrees on the Richter scale. Soldiers from the Chemical Protection Corps carried out decontamination of the reactor room for the first and the second units. A few months later, these units will be operational again. Pipes about 35 meters long are being lifted to the ceiling. According to the project plans, there will be 27 such pipes installed. Soviet leaders had tried to convince 47,000 evacuated inhabitants of Pripyat that they would return to their homes. At the time this film was taken, government assurances had proven to be worthless. Like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Pripyat joined the list of towns conquered by the atom. Flying near the plant, we can see the cockpit protected by lead and concrete, from which specialists supervise the progress of construction. The roofing will cover unexamined areas of the reactor, including its upper plate, which weighs almost 3,000 tons and stands vertically after the explosion. Diagnostic instruments attached to the plate are clearly visible. Construction of the south part of the roofing is finished. The west wall, which remained after the explosion, is shielded by a metal covering 50 meters high. Construction is finally over. The long, dangerous flights are also at an end. The shelter seems to be solid, but tons of nuclear fuel remain under an unsealed sarcophagus. Steadily corroding and resting on unstable foundations, the shelter becomes ever more dangerous. The Chernobyl problem is still unresolved.